Yeah, everybody can see us.
Was machst du denn da?
Ja, Rückblick.
Oh ja, da letztes Jahr.
What are you doing? I'm looking back.
Oh ja.
Oh yeah, a lot of stuff has happened this year. Yeah, we've, traveled quite a bit. Dortmund and whatnot.
Profis erzählen.
Anyway, let the professionals
Konstanze.
Nexus.
get the mic.
Krieger.
Constanze, Nexus, Frank Rieger, and Linus. Louder. Applause, applause, applause. Test, test. Gotta turn it on. I did turn it on. Oh, I turned it off. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the CCC Year in Review 2017. This year, we're not going to do a chronological take because that way it wouldn't make a lot of sense. So we tried to do this topic by topic. So we want to say thanks to our old location in Hamburg. That's what it looks like now after we're done with it.
Ja, und so eine Location zu verlassen ist natürlich...
Yeah, leaving such a location that's emotional.
Wie sich auch die Veranstaltung gewandelt hat. Wir haben den 28C3 in Berlin mit ungefähr
The 28th C3 still
gepasst haben.
in Berlin would have fit into the main hall in Hamburg.
Als Hackcenter hatten. Oder also so die Grundfläche.
So there was a lot more space available there.
Von etwas über 3 auf 6 auf 12.000.
So from 3,000 we went to 6,000 to 12,000 people within a couple of years, and that's really something to be proud of.
Wer von euch ist denn zum ersten Mal auf dem Kongress?
Who in this room,
Ja, herzlich willkommen.
whose first Congress is this? Yeah, welcome everybody.
Ja, so eine Veranstaltung auf
Yeah. Having these events become larger and larger is only possible because we have lots of people supporting and helping out as angels. So, round of applause for them.
das ist auch so ein bisschen so der Kern dessen, wie der Chaos Computer Club funktioniert.
I think that's sort of the core principle, the way the Chaos Computer Club works. It's
Wenn wir im Laufe des Jahres rückblicken.
of course, this has certain effects, and we're going to talk about those later. So we're not always working together in a super professional sort of way, because all of us still have regular lives, a regular day job, and what we do and what people do for this club is they do in their free time. And so
Schon überlegen müssen.
if we're dealing with professional lobby groups, we really have to think about how we can handle such conflicts. And the question is,
Eine Community, die immer größer wird,
in this club, during these events, how do we create a community that still sort of is bound together, even though we become more and more and our interests become more diverse, and there's
zueinander kommen. Und das ist so eine der
yeah different modes of thought and of community here. And yeah, I think we're going to see that in the next few years, not just at the events but also in the CCC itself, especially during our time in Hamburg. We've grown a lot, and that was on purpose, and we're really happy about that. And all of the different teams that, for example, Chaospartinnen chaos godfathers and mothers that try to introduce newbies, especially female ones, to these events. And I think that's one thing we all can agree on, that we need respectful. We need to be respectful towards one another, and I really think that's also worth a round of applause. We have first aid provided by the CERT on a professional level every year, and every year they become better and better. And
Wir haben können insbesondere auch, wenn es Limitierungen gibt,
they really can.
für all das bereitstehen. Wir haben
They're really ready to meet all kinds of different needs. And so again, please, a round of applause for them.
Dolmetscher, wir haben das Lingo-Team.
Yeah, we have translations in different languages.
Even for his signing.
Wir haben auch seit einigen Jahren schon ein Team, was
We also have a team supporting autistic people. This has been unofficial for a while, but now it's an official service. And these teams really grow out of the community, and it's mostly self-organizing. It's not top-down. They don't need a lot of help from us, basically. And the number of angels at these events growing more and more is also something we are very proud of, that people think of themselves as active members of this community. And for example, the Young Hacker Day, we have kids and families, and we've created an open space for these structures, and that's really great as well. And this is a thank you to you guys.
And we're obviously also very excited about the new playground that we now get to play on. Oh yeah, really we do. And as we can see with moving, there's a few things that you can change directly. I mean, obviously there's room for optimization, and even if it's just a typographic thing. All right. In this sense, this Congress is a beta version, so please forgive us small bumps alongside the way. Those are all stuff that we want to improve on next year, so it's on everyone to make these things better that this year we didn't run so smoothly yet. So, I mean, not all stuff is unpacked, so. All right, let's get back to the classics of this review. The CCC is a big family that's a lot bigger than the actual association or club that is the core that deals with the financial stuff, and we want to quickly talk about this. As usual, the office in Hamburg supplied us with some crunching of numbers, and they're like actually dealing with a couple thousand of members, and these are the new members of the last 12 quarters of the past, and you can see how the structure is changing. You can see that in the beginning of the year, there's usually a few less people signing up in comparison to the end of the year. And you can see that the club is growing continuously. Once again, this year, we have a significant number of new members joining the club, and that is amazing to see. That there's people and that the mass of people joining is growing. Oh, well, you have to explain the anomalies. Oh, you mean the general anomalies? Well, I don't know. I mean, it could be because I mean the next block is quite big. It might be that the office went on vacation in January. To be honest, I mean you have to see it this way. We have like also numbers of like how many emails are being sent out by hand, not automated, and I have no idea how people are like actually executing these tasks. Like honestly, that serves some mad respect out there. Round of applause. And I mean, we heard at this event that there's a few new members, donating members. So please forgive us if the office sometimes is a bit slow. Right after the Congress, it's always a bit like there's always a big pile of paper, and I mean going through that. And I mean, all of that is also obviously voluntary based, so please bear with us with stuff like that. And I mean, there are not even that many people in Hamburg, so they're really busy. All right, so we tried to understand where the Chaos Computer Club is concentrated within Germany. And I mean, like, we have a few enclaves abroad and local groups. And these are called Alpha, and they're that stems back in time to the beginning. And there's still Chaos Treffs, which is Chaos Meetup, and these local groups is where the Chaos Computer Club is happening throughout the entire year. This is where people get together, where people start projects, where they think about what we can do, where they come up with events, where they do initiatives, local press work, and yeah, normally create the social space, the hackerspace that they fill with life. And that means that this is really the heart and the soul of the club, not what we show to the outside, but what's happening in the local groups where people get together. You really have to say at this aspect, like when we were talking about this, the content-based work that's happening throughout the entire year is, and I mean we'll get back to that in the end, is we usually have a block on the events that are being run throughout the year, and they're really done by the local groups. They're organized by them. And this is also what really carries this Congress. This is what brings people together, and this is what basically makes possible that these kind of events, especially on this scale, also are possible to happen. And I mean, if you're here for the first place and you ask yourself, how is it going to continue, please check if in your city, if there's a local CCC group that gets together, go meet them, get involved. They're usually super friendly, and they usually have an open door day. Please, like, check out the assemblies here, get in touch with them already here on site with your local group. And I mean, we have this beautiful tradition that people at Congress get together that have never ever met before in real life. So that's just beautiful to see. Yeah, there's another round of applause for that. All right, we also have worldwide members, quite a few actually. They're spread out, funny enough, to the German-speaking foreign countries, but also other additional countries where German is not the first language. If you look at the global map, you can see that we're basically everywhere. Look at this map where all of our members are being spread out. But Nexus, you wanted to explain the colors, right? Those is not self-explanatory. Yeah, the office mailed us that, and we looked at it, and we like thinking about it, and we like compared it to the list beforehand. And as darker as the colors, that correlates to the number of members. So the white spaces are not spaces where we don't have members. It's just a place where there's a smaller number of members. And the gray ones is places where we have to seek members. So that's maybe an initiative, like a good way of what we are aiming for in the future to really fill out that map. So maybe just, move abroad. All right, let's go into the topics now. So one of the main subjects where we had the most requests in the press department was two topics, really. One of them was the whole complex around fake news, social bots, and the Netzdg, which is Germany's attempt at controlling hate speech. It's the Network Enforcement Act, where they're trying to work against hate speech online. And that was really hard. Like those kind of requests about social bots, and like a month. Like, I mean, last year we already had that kind of flood of requests on this subject. And I mean, like the DPA, the German news agency, probably tweeted something about social bots. And I mean, this was a very big subject for our work all of a sudden. And I mean, like a couple of months in, one technic results report was done, and we were like asked to evaluate that, and there were public hearings and non-public hearings, and the whole subject, I mean, doesn't even have that much meat to it, like the straight Trojan horse, for example, from the technical aspects of things. But if you look at the situation that kind of led to, I mean, look at the date of this picture. You can just see his facial expression and how much we liked this subject. It's the 30th of January, and I am only good mooded, happy, and it's a bit just, I've been looked at with a bit of suspicion from the other experts on the panel. But I mean, that also shows the role that the CCC has to play within these kind of hearings. And I mean, we were a little upset how undata-driven, how unfact-driven the debate around this was. Like this year, there was 2 lectures. Oh, I mean 3. It's actually 3. So three presentations on the subject. I think we are really showing how you can deal with this subject from an academic standpoint, driven by facts and numbers, and actually deal with the subject of social bots.
And this changed a bit throughout the years. The debate used to be, well, the debate has become more focused on scientific studies that maybe we should talk about, and the hysteria that initially has left the debate. The hysteria about Russian opinion robots that brought us Brexit and Trump, and that hypothesis was a bit untenable. And there was one more thing we noticed in Germany, and that was when the US Congress published and invited experts about Russian media manipulation. And that was a phenomenon we observed. We looked at this and said, honestly, those few bots on Twitter won't have swung the election. Have you thought about targeted advertising, which is the business model of these antisocial networks? And we were the only ones saying this. And interestingly, this showed in the American Congress a few months later, when it turned out that political ads were paid in rubles, and these networks said, yes, seems legit, you can do that. And this topic of social bots seemed to miss the point a bit. Nonetheless, it's obvious that the loss of trust in politics and media that's summed up in the term fake news is a real problem. And it's also a real problem that interaction on the internet is not the way it's supposed to be, and this network is currently failing to give us the interaction and the exchange that we were hoping it would bring us. And we are looking at this network in some horror, seeing how people interact with each other. and
reagieren.
observing how the German government reacts to this.
Relativ bald die Diskussion über das Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz los.
And then we got into the debate about the Network Enforcement Act, where the German Minister of Justice, Heiko Maas, made a suggestion that
Wenig qualifizierten Arbeiten seines Hauses
fit perfectly with the rest of his unqualified remarks, and that completely missed the core of the subject. This Network Enforcement Act contains exactly one sensible point, and that is that sites that publish user-generated content need to have somebody in Germany whom you can call. So a way to reach the operator when you have problems, but the rest of this act simply delegates the execution of law to the platform operators, which are the same ones who have these ads. And although the government didn't want to say whom they meant, they didn't want to name any networks.
Für mich war zwei Sachen waren daran interessant. Einmal
Two things about this were interesting.
bei netzpolitischen Themen diese Art von Bündnis gefunden hat.
And
Bemerkenswert breit.
I was amazed how large
So in einen Topf
how many people protested and how many organizations teamed up to protest against this.
der
But also how little this opposition
im Bundestag.
was found in the debates in Parliament. They didn't seem to understand what the people out there were opposing. The reaction to this opposition was
Von Seiten
surprisingly small from the federal government. And just to show you how large the opposition was, Volker Tripp from the Digital Society, whom I called and said, the Chaos Communication Club has decided to join this coalition. And he said, oh, brilliant. Just one question, Linus. If Facebook were to join the coalition, would you withdraw? And that's how broad this coalition opposing this law was. And that goes to show how manifold the criticism against this act was, and how many different kinds of criticisms there were.
selbst hat sich tatsächlich geäußert. In vielen anderen Ländern, also schriftlich, in vielen anderen Ländern hat eine Regierung keine.
In many different countries, there were,
Aber immerhin scheint der deutsche Markt
but the German market seems to be so interesting that
teilweise mit
the details in technical and
bemerkenswert. Da sind wir anders als andere Länder.
yeah, so Germany seems to be very special here.
Per Gesetz, pass auf. Du musst
So basically, by law, it is now stated that one has to
Äußerungen innerhalb von 24 Stunden von der Plattform
posts that have to be deleted. Certain posts have to be deleted after 24 hours if they violate free speech. So, as a service provider, this content is reported, and then you have to decide, is this a content that has to be deleted or not? So there's two types of mistakes you can make. If I delete the post, but it would have been covered by free speech,
war ja mein gutes Recht. Ich musste ja löschen.
well, I just had to be sure. I had to delete it.
Ich lasse das mal stehen.
And if I say, this is covered by free speech, I'm gonna leave this up. But then a court rules that I made a wrong decision, that it wasn't covered by free speech. Then there's hard penalties that can be spoken out against me. So deleting too little costs money. Deleting too much doesn't cost money. So that no one here is interested in
Illegalen Tätigkeiten.
hateful posts, illegal activities, violence on the internet that some, weird people put out on the internet. What's really prohibited by law, that's not free speech. But what really, you know, brings us forward as a society doesn't happen in the center of society. It's on the fringes, on you know, in different shades of gray, and that's something we need to encourage. And it's not always about, you know, agreeing with each other, and we'd really like to keep this discourse going. And it doesn't mean that we're on the side of some, you know, crazy people who can't think of anything else to do with the internet than spew hate. And this Network Enforcement Act, you know, it was called Facebook Act most of the time in the media. And so the irony of us talking about this and being asked for expert opinion, being the only ones in our society that don't use this sort of nonsense. Yeah, this seems like some sort of zoo. It's slightly ironic that the Chaos Computer Club and friends of the Chaos Computer Club are highly likely to not be on Facebook. So yeah, all of this was much ado about nothing. The government passed the Network Enforcement Act. It's now binding law, and it's already been implemented. And how well this works, we could see only shortly after, because Russia copied the law exactly. And so they said, you know, well, this works pretty well. They can enforce their censorship measures with the exact wording of the German act. So, you know, we're going to have to talk to the next German government about this. And what I'd like to point out is that what the government did, they said that the laws that we have in Germany aren't enforceable on the internet. So by our standards, that means that we say that our democratic structure has failed. And this sort of thinking is really scary. And, you know, we can see this in Russia, how easily this is implemented. So that's something to think about. So, yeah, once more about Heiko Maas, the Minister of Justice of the Social Democratic Party. I really hope he won't get that post in a new government that might constitute itself soon. So I really feel he's responsible, even going beyond the Network Enforcement Act. It's really hard to, within German political coalitions, when we have questions of surveillance and civil rights, there's really no more equilibrium. When we look at the Ministry of the Interior in many projects that we're going to talk about later, in working together with the Ministry of Justice, there really wasn't anyone defending the Constitution and the basic rights in our Constitution, and that means I'm really disappointed in our Minister of Justice. So the normalization of surveillance measures, not debating whether data can be retained at all, but just talking about how long and how much, that's really, a great example for me to show how it's all going downhill from here. Yeah, one more thing we noticed during the course of this debate is that the ad-financed networks are trying to create new rules for themselves, for example, Twitter. And what we see is that this isn't about a lawfully ruled state. By Twitter's rules, they would have blocked Trump's account long ago. But now there's an exception that mentions the term newsworthiness. You could call that the Trump anomaly. So Twitter said that, well, we have very clear community guidelines, and if somebody, you know, for example, incites violence on our platform, for example, against North Korea, that's not in accordance with our community guidelines, but we're still going to leave it up because it is news related. So this discussion about Twitter is really related to the US and not to the Network Enforcement Act in Germany. But still, all platforms really reacted to political pressure, even YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. But for Twitter, the fact that they have this exception of newsworthiness is really interesting, because that's really a marker for the year 2017, a distinctive feature. We have a president that has no respect whatsoever for all different forms of decency, and who still surprises me with his political communication. And then on Twitter, of course, Trump is a problem, even internationally, because he goes against the community guidelines and incites violence and posts hate speech. So, yeah, we can sum up these rules. We don't like hate speech and post that incite violence, but if it brings clicks, well, it's all right. So, yeah, when they were asked about it, Twitter said that there was a two-step change to the community guidelines. So it wasn't just about text posts, it was also about hate symbols, for example, the swastika. Twitter doesn't differentiate between rules in Europe and rules in the US, which also means that the stronger free speech rules in the US also apply to Europe, which is different than Facebook, obviously. Yeah, do we stick to the ad networks? Yeah, what happens is that censorship and the removal of hate speech, the responsibility for that is dumped on the corporations. And so for them, of course, it's an incentive to automate that procedure, because every job obviously costs money, a lot more than some CPUs and some data center. So there's lots of automatic detection of hate speech going on, which re-invites a discussion we had in the 90s, where we had people walking around with crossed out swastikas, or swastikas being thrown in a trash can. So clear statements against Nazis. And these people were all alone on the list of on police lists of offenders against unconstitutional for the use of unconstitutional symbols. So we can see the same thing happening today on Facebook and Twitter, because a swastika, it's very easy for an algorithm to find, and the exact same thing is also, for example, we can see with Kurds in Turkey. So free speech on the big ad-based networks isn't enforced right now, because as soon as you have images of people belonging to a Kurdish party, these posts get removed automatically. So what we have here is really
legitimiert, muss man klar sagen. Staatlich legitimiert.
a development of
Zum Definieren,
legitimized by the state,
was darf man noch sagen und was darf man nicht sagen werden. Und das heißt,
the development of these corporations turning into the instruments of power that decide what can't or can't be said. And that's something that shouldn't happen.
All right. A good aspect is to see that in this whole debate on fake news that we experienced this year and witnessed this year, we are capable to move forward and go into subjects that the politics have slept on for many, many years, that are we now trying to put on the agenda and are trying to move forward. A round of applause. We have this project, Chaos Does School, that last year had a talk that was very well received, and they were back this year, and I think I've heard really good stuff about it. And we have, in the beginning of this year, starting from the team Chaos Does School, we kind of also put our own efforts in, and we demanded and we generated demands of how a modern digital school is supposed to look like. Because if we look at what's actually going on with regards to smart boards, where you literally have to explain to teachers how they function in their core simple functionalities, and you really have to pay attention that they might not get on them with whiteboard markers. So digital education for teachers, or people who are training to become teachers, we can see what happens when you sleep on your education policies and when you sleep on the education of teachers. And you really have to get a feeling for how what we used to have with newspaper articles, that we kind of did that fact check, but on the internet, all of a sudden these news come in faster, and we kind of don't do this. And starting there, it's important. It's really important to start with school education, with high school education. And if you start with high school education, you have to start with the education of teachers and professionals who are teaching, and that means that you have, on a federal state level, have to get people in influential positions to really start executing this on a political level, because Germany is a decentralized state, so education is a decision based on federal state. And there's every once in a while, there's people come up to us and address us, and they ask us, so what do you want to say about this? And our usual response is well, the politics really need to wake up. There's this thing called the internet. This is not a subject that needs to be pushed into computer science in a course for half a year. This is a subject that needs to be a part of every subject being taught in school. This is a very fundamental thing going into every aspect of life. Round of applause. And obviously this has not reached school, and that in history there's that articles from the internet are being read, that you have to deal about in ethics and philosophy. What does internet do with society? Within language classes, you have to how can you not access translation software and dictionaries from online? There's so much internet online that's useful for students. What we did was we wrote down demands so that we can get students to become active, aware members. They don't need to necessarily know how to program, but they need to start understanding how the internet functions and how these structures work, and integrate that within subjects, all of the subjects, and that's what matters. And we need to back up teachers and go into the universities and have that being part of the academic agenda and curriculum, so that teachers can get help and get people in touch with people like Chaos Does School, get them in touch with independent groups like us who are not advertise-driven, who are not big companies, who really need to, in the US, it's very common that you decide between Facebook and Google, and we don't want that in Germany. It needs to be clear that digitalization is something that is an individual development, and that's something that we need to separate from commercial structures, especially when it comes to the level of high schools. A round of applause. And we have the hope that with our demands, we at least reach the one or other person and maybe even get a ball rolling somewhere. I mean, you really realized that the other day, like that, you realized that it was like a very important project for me, that Chaos Does School. And I just see this project growing every year. And at the same time, I ask myself, what is it? What is it that in 2017, like we as the CCC have to get our voluntary people to spend their free time to go into the schools to do like a day of media competence? How do we still need to get that out of our voluntary resources, like from the brilliant people that work with us in 2017? I mean, this discussion has been in the past year. We had this discussion like how was a question, like one of the questions, whether or not we should still keep the internet and the existence of internet a secret. And then you have the philology association, and they go and they are like, oh, you should just pick up a book for a change. And when you think about these schools that we kind of put money in as a society, and we kind of think of as necessary, and are like, their overall goal is to generate resourceful, active members for our future societies that need to move all of us forward. Like, how can we like think about keeping the internet secret from them? Like, from the first grade on, you need to do what Chaos Does School is in very motivated but very exhausting voluntary work is doing. But that's really not what voluntary work is supposed to do. It's not supposed to pick up the pieces from where politics and politicians fail society on a daily basis. Round of applause, but thank you, Chaos Does School. We really need you guys. I really want to summarize that. It's really bitter and just hard to see that. I mean, it's really gone crazy last year. Like, all of a sudden, they've becoming a lot of attention, and it's really, really sad to see that Chaos Does School can do 1,000 times more than what our education politics manages to do in the past 14 years. A round of applause for that from the audience. I'd like to take this moment to mention that Chaos Does School is not alone. I mean, there's like whoever was at one of these events from Jugendhakt or Coda Dojos. Like there's obviously more than just Chaos Does School. And the multiple crypto parties, I mean, it's a whole scene by now that is like organizing this regularly, even for also education for grown-ups, like for just people who want to get informed, like beyond sometimes even state help. There's like a scene that has grown that publicly takes on this issue, and I'm really happy that there's a talk from yesterday that Chaos Does School did yesterday, like that it was so well received, and that they got such great feedback. Round of applause from the audience coming in now. And you please don't forget that planning of these kind of education bureaucracy is done by people who think that in computer science you should mainly learn how to handle Microsoft Office software. I mean, like, I was honestly in a bit of a state of shock. Like, to really show the extent of this, like, I'm sorry that we have to like keep writing this horse, but the time window of when there's sort of developments that happened, like between people that had the first own computers and then had internet access to smartphones, the people that experienced that kind of transition and change and had the possibility to understand how these changes are interconnected and how they're changing, and like it's so normal for you guys because you've seen the development of these things and where all of that came from, like how that computer actually works. Like, that time window is so tiny, and the tiny humans that are growing now, they're just getting this lighting board that's looking at them, and they can just swipe left and right, and somebody needs to explain to them what this is, that they don't think. Like, they need to understand that it's not just a magical thing, and we need to take the power away from the people who program these machines for them. They need to start understanding these machines. And there's a big round of applause for that last statement.
So, kommen wir.
All right, let's get back to other subjects, like our central competences.
Nein, Hacken ist und bleibt.
Hacking, obviously, is our daily bread. I almost said, and I actually did. We're a hacking group, we're a hacker club. We're going to stay that way. And we're going to hack other hackers, and in this case, the state. So the state-run Trojan horse has been a long-lasting subject for us. For years now, we have been pushing our ideas into what's going on there. And I mean, like, it's been a very exhausting kind of process. And this time around, we were invited to give our statement. Oh, no, the statement was on the 31st of May, and on the 29th of May, I got the invitation that kindly asked me to show up on Wednesday, on the 31st of May, to show up for a change in the law, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, this is about, in a very long STPO novella, I mean, this been going through all the justice committees. In the last minute, they had all of a sudden tried to implement and include a state-run Trojan horse. Like, this is something that they did last minute, kind of like a Houdini. I mean, everybody kind of agreed that for many years, this is what they were trying to get to agree upon, and they were like, oh, great, like, it's now end of legislation is coming up, and I mean, it's great now, we need to push this, we need to make the decision on this, because otherwise this is not going to happen, because, I mean, the governmental elections were coming up. And this is the moment, so STPO is the official process order of how law is being executed. Okay, so all of a sudden they're like, let's push this because legislation is ending and there's elections. So all of a sudden they come up with a formulation and hand it down to the parliament itself, and this is how they need to and are supposed to formulate the law. And I mean, it's great that the executive is helping the legislative. That's wonderful. With helping them out with the formulation. And this is what it meant for us. Last minute statements, of course, we're going to thankfully and happily come and take part in this. So the implementation of a state-run Trojan horse basically looks like paragraph 104, changing word number B5. He's literally listing the actual law now, and it's really hard to translate that because he's going very fast. So for anybody interested, read up on what they were trying to implement. Go on Linus's Twitter and look for that tweet. Okay, so the introduction of these new cuts on our fundamental rights are being handed to you as a diff, basically, so that you don't understand them within the context. Like, you literally get the pieces that were changed. You basically better get a diff with comments, but without any context. And I mean, the problem with this is that not even the people, the members of the parliament, are getting like the full context of this, and they're reading all of this. So the moment when we found out about this, we were like marched towards parliament to the parties, and we're like, what the heck? Like, you can't really be serious about this. I mean, we've been working on this for a couple of years now. Like, normally, like, you have recursive rounds, you discuss stuff, and then this party and this party informally kind of gives like their opinion, and like, what happened this time around? And like, all of a sudden, this was just done kind of like style of the US Americans, like just last minute, without like sneaking it in through a back door, basically. The changes of the law, and the Social Democrats basically refused to discuss this with us. And I mean, like, the Justice Ministry didn't say anything against this. Nothing. I mean, what do you mean against this? I mean, that's where the formulation helping came from. I mean, what happened there is the worst case scenario in the parliamentary democracy that we've witnessed. Linus mentioned in the beginning that we've been fighting about this state-run Trojan horse for like 10 years. We remember there is two laws two prosecutions on a constitutional law ground, and the second ruling. Over the course of these 10 years, it was very clear that state-run hacking and state-run Trojan horses are in connection to terrorism. But what we have here in the change of the law is a broadening of this law that goes much, much, much further than having something against terrorism. Like, it takes into account everything, like forfeiting documents, like very little offenses. So they were trying to basically get in by another.
Nicht auf unsere Bürgerrechte gepocht und sie haben den
They were trying to push this through the back door, and the experts who could have contributed to this got a time frame that was completely ridiculous.
Unsere Computer zu hacken.
We've had a landslide without parallel regarding how it's allowed to hack our computers. And just to stress this point, they've been coming to us for years. Yeah, it's only for terrible terrorists, and of course we have to protect privacy. But this is no longer the case, and we're looking forward to fighting this in front of the Constitutional Court, because there are going to be constitutional complaints against us, and several of them.
Aber wir lassen es ja mit uns machen, haben dann in 1,5 Tagen Zeit 20 Seiten formuliert.
Do this to us. We formulated some thoughts on this, and Constanze and Frank helped me out a lot.
Wir gehen zwar davon aus, dass, weil natürlich alle unsere Stellungnahmen immer auch auf CCC steht, die alle gelesen
because
haben,
all of our statements are on can be found on ccc.de.
In Erinnerung habt. Wir haben natürlich inhaltlich neue Schwerpunkte gesetzt, denn die IT-Welt hat sich verändert. Wir haben früher sehr intensiv
we discussed this very intensely earlier, and privacy that we talked about a lot, and preventing hacking, and what's the personal. We have 4 years of Snowden behind us. We have questions of IT security.
Markt, der einer ist, wenn wir über Exploits und über den Handel von Sicherheitslücken reden, wenn sich dort mit
there's a market here,
eine Form von ökonomischer Incentivierung. Also wir haben, glaube ich, ganz andere Schwerpunkte gesetzt.
If our tax money is used for this, then it's a case of economic incentivization, and
Feld hat sich erweitert.
I think this field has grown, and
ist auch wenn wenig Zeit war, gelungen.
Even if there was little time, we succeeded in changing the debate of changing the agenda of the debate.
Also nicht nur mit uns gemacht. Hier, das ist
and
das
these things aren't just being done with us. This is a letter from the Federal Data Protection Officer that's submitting her point of view to the work group. Unfortunately, the ministry avoided asking me for a comment on this change to the law. I was only informed about this through the media on the 17th of May. So the Federal Data Protection Officer found out about this in the media, and that medium was netzpolitik.org, where this proposed change of law was leaked. And in light of the considerable privacy implications of this, I cannot understand how I was given such a short time frame to add my comments, and therefore I have to restrict myself to certain corner points. But at least we were very surprised by these strongest words that our Federal Data Protection Officer was able to find, which is very unusual. Or you could say that it was so terrible that even the Data Protection Officer said something.
Und
Ja.
wir haben ja ungefähr schon gesagt, dass wir das für einen mittelschweren Skandal halten.
And
Aber
we've probably made it clear that we consider
Aber am
this
Ende darf man sich natürlich dann auch
massive
nicht
scandal, but
Genau. Weil
at the end of the day, you can still be made a fool of. The German Conservative Party, the CDU, comes along and pokes fun at this. I mean, this is ridiculing the entire parliamentary process, and then they didn't even have the balls to keep this tweet up, but they deleted it. I mean, I don't know what marketing agency the party has, but this was a great reply from us.
So, was man dazu noch sagen muss, wir reden ja hier so von Ende Mai, ne? Und das heißt also,
And
da
we
war
are
so die
talking
Zeit, wo
about the
allen Parteien
end of
klar war, so
May,
im
and that was the
Bundestagswahl,
time when all the parties
der
realized,
Cyberrusse
there's a election
halt
coming
alle
up and the
Kanzler
evil
und
cyber Russian is standing at the gates. And they were worrying that their email exchanges might be hacked and leaked like Hillary's. And what's fascinating was that the connection between you're trying to push through this this Trojan horse, and you're worried about the Russian cybering you, was completely missed by the parties. And the month of WannaCry in May was May was also the month of WannaCry, and that we didn't manage to connect that. But we'll get to that later. They tried to push the debate away from this. They didn't quite succeed. And of course, this horrible example was repeated in some of the state legislations, and we were very happy that the state of Hesse saw many local initiatives of the CCC gathering to protest this. The CCC's press team tends to deal with federal politics most of the time, but it was great to see that we can work together on this, and that there are topics that simply concern certain federal states that can still be supported by the by press releases, and we're going to keep track of this and trying to prevent this state Trojan from entering more state laws, because somebody has to clean up behind this by submitting constitutional complaints, and we don't have unlimited capacity. We tried this in Hesse, and they are very active, and we're quite proud of them. We need to hurry a bit. I'm going to say very little about this very quickly. There was one debate during Republika in Berlin where the then Minister of the Interior, Thomas de Maizière, joined the debate. And you know, this is the minister who did the net political discourse in his first term of office, and of course all of this has been forgotten. Also the papers that resulted out of these dialogues that showed a bit more balanced view on net regulation. First of all, he gave a very boring talk before the actual discussion, but he did allow discussion about the kind of surveillance that he has to answer for, especially data retention that is a result of his term of office, but also biometric data, and how we talk about simply retaining data by default, and how much he pushed that agenda. I found that the debate was not very productive.
Die politische Diskussion schwächer ausfällt. Mir fehlt
I miss this echo because there isn't a lot of debate within the political coalition. This may change with the new government, because it's no longer going to be a grand coalition, but simply a coalition of the Conservatives and Social Democrats. I mean, I'm not very thrilled about the fact that the leader of the opposition is now the right-wing AfD party. I mean, a lot of this was connected to the refugee crisis in a horrible way, because I thought it was awful that the established parties were trying to were being overwhelmed by this right-wing discourse, and we're going to have to work against this. It's not going to get any better.
Aber damit wir nicht so furchtbar negativ sind, kommen wir zu ein paar positiven Sachen und wollen
let's talk about something positive for a change.
Eine Broschüre hervorheben.
I would like to show you this brochure as an example. This brochure comes from the Swiss Chaos Communication Club. It's been downloaded heaps of times, and it proves how much demand there is, even if there's not, even if the politics doesn't reflect this, but this kind of digital literacy or digital emancipation is something that we think is very important, and it's been, we hope that these offers by the CCC that make digital know-how more accessible will be something that we get more of in the future, and thank you very much to the Swiss CCC.
Also einer der Dinge, die wir immer nicht vergessen dürfen bei all dem ganzen
yeah, what we mustn't forget is that, you know, protesting all of these awful decisions can also be quite fun. Otherwise it would be pretty boring. And so the stuff happening at Südkreuz area in Berlin, where the government is trying to establish mass surveillance in people's everyday lives with a public test. So there's facial recognition going on there, and that's fed into some sort of system, and people could sign up for that. And there was a really nice protest against this, more than one even, where people wearing all sorts of masks and holding out signs showed up. So yeah, these were different protests. These were different days. So we had Spider-Man costumes with masks. You can't see them here, but it was great. It was colorful. It was yeah. So we arrived during the break, and because the minister showed up there 2 times for looking at this, and the people just went up and down the escalators, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I think that's just something we need from time to time, to not, you know, fall into some kind of hole, because our Minister of the Interior said on camera that he didn't just wish for the sort of surveillance to be widespread, but also to introduce this in all of Germany's various states. So we can see here that he's, you know, equating facial recognition surveillance with other kinds of surveillance, and I really feel that the meaning about this, the popular opinion has changed. When I think back of my first Congress, where there was a study of biometric surveillance, That was, back then there was information put out by the government. We had access to the study. We could read it, even though some addendums weren't made public. But now there are no numbers available anymore. And when we look at the statements being made by politicians, we can really see that they're not even trying to explain how this should work on a technical level. And the requests for free information, where we got a lot of paper back, but the main elements and the costs of these projects weren't made public. And again, this is an unwillingness to lead a public discourse when people can't really see what this is all about, but we just get some small press releases from the ministry, and this isn't adequate at all, and that leads us into some sort of Trump propaganda sort of style where we can't even figure out whether something is right or wrong, where we can't even really figure out what's going on when we talk about national security, fiscal interests, because of course, there's private corporations involved here. So, this unwillingness really, we need to fight that, and I want to fight that.
Ich glaube, ich wirke etwas verbiestert, aber wir hatten durchaus auch Spaß.
I believe, I sound a bit angry right now, but we really had fun at these protests, so that's what I want to point out. This unwillingness on the side of the politicians, like we're not going to tell you anything anymore. That's really some other project where we can really see that is the Nsa Inquiry Committee. Oh wait, I still have to say something about the station at Südkreuz.
Mach weiter, als hätte ich nichts gesagt.
Ja, also dieser BND-Untersuchungsausschuss.
Go ahead. Yeah, the NSA BND Committee of Inquiry.
Alles, was irgendwie da sinnvoll bewegt wurde.
I don't know. What really happened there came from the media, by which I mean Edward Snowden. And so this style of unwillingness to engage in discourse really permeates throughout all levels of government right now. All right, two things. I really, really encourage you to read this very long report, committee report. And we even have one that isn't blacked out at netzpolitik.org. So we can't really understand all of it because some of it refers to secret information, but still it's a good start to inform yourself about what was going on. And of course the pictures of Merkel being invited as a witness. And again, Mr. Ströbele yesterday, he really made this clear that this, this probably won't have any consequences on a political level. Mass surveillance, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, they're just, like, we don't care. So, this again, as an example, following the revelations of Edward Snowden and mass surveillance, there's cases at the EU Human Rights Court, and some of these cases were heard together at the court, which increased media attention. And I don't have any doubts about the EU Human Rights Court deciding in our favor. But again, the argumentation of the British spokesperson there, how they explained how mass surveillance is explained, and their argumentation for mass surveillance is different from ours. So they're not even talking about data retention, data collection anymore. They, so from the US, we know, like we're gonna collect a lot of data to find something, but the British person said that we need this growing pile of data because we wanna keep working with that data. We don't just wanna find something, but we also want to increase that sort of surveillance of. Okay, we don't have that much time.
Überraschung haben wir nicht so viel Zeit.
What a surprise. Yeah, so there's a lot more to be said about that. There's also a recording online. And we're gonna, keep you informed. And I don't have any doubts that this sort of mass surveillance doesn't go along with EU human rights.
Eine schöne Illustration, was passiert, wenn die Geheimdienste so vor sich hin.
Yeah, a nice example of what happens when
Relativ bald, nämlich WannaCry.
Hier sehen wir,
there's no public overwatch over intelligence services is WannaCry. Here we see
ist natürlich blöd,
patients' data being centrally monitored. And of course, it's really bad when you get a crypto locker that also uses some technical measures to permeate your whole network, which also led to the info monitors of the Deutsche Bahn, German Railway, not being that readable. And then they got out the old wooden signs and really wrote by hand, the next train is going to... and so, it wasn't all bad, and that's WannaCry.
Genau. Ärgerlich natürlich, bleiben wir nochmal bei den Krankenhäusern.
So, yeah, what's really annoying, let's talk about hospitals again. When we got the first news reports out of Great Britain, at least I got the first ones out of Great Britain,
Krankenhäuser auf einmal wieder mit Stift und
hospitals were hit by this attack, and they had to work with pen and paper again. And so WannaCry
sowas wie Logistikunternehmen
struck hospitals, logistics, industrial production facilities. And of course, all of these applications share a similarity. They're niche software. And what we mean by this is software that has a very specific field of application. It's written by very specific small to middle-sized software companies. And it's all about very specialized
MRT-Scanner hängt.
handmade software for dedicated applications. For example, the computer that runs an MRT scanner. And so a money printing machine like an MRT scanner, that has to be run every day. And so you can't always, turn it off and turn it on again just to install a new update. So there's very few customers, and they're being used 24/7, so they're not constantly updated because the developer says, we wrote the software and we can't just update it, so please run it on Windows XP. And of course, Windows XP isn't officially supported anymore, but it's just
End of patches.
It's not end of life, it's end of patches. But yeah, I just want to point out the problem that exists, and we need to handle that. People need to handle that. You can't just, hindsight is 2020. You can't just say like, oh, hospitals have acted foolishly. So the weakness, the loophole that allowed WannaCry was, as I mentioned, the SMB shares. And that was a zero-day vulnerability that the NSA sat on for years. And so, if I get the chronological order right, starting in August, the shadow brokers stole all of those tools from the NSA. And so it was very clear that the knowledge of this vulnerability was out, was not just with the NSA, but with an unknown group. So Microsoft patched this vulnerability called Eternal Blue in March. So since March, this update was out. But only in April, the shadow brokers released the vulnerability. So that could have happened every day, but even the shadow brokers had the ethical limitation, well, 1 month after Microsoft rolled out the patch. Now we're going to make this vulnerability public. So the NSA had this vulnerability for years and never had the same ethical limits. So the NSA, you know, it's not about ethics, it's about rules. So of course they have, they didn't follow their written rules. So it's not about ethical questions. And as a result, we can say that WannaCry is just part of the disaster that the NSA allowed to happen and exist for years.
I mean, this discussion, I have two more things about this. I think this discussion changed a bit because there's so many health organizations and facility organizations that were involved in this. There were so many. When it started in Great Britain, it was very clear that it is about life and death and health of people. And I think that really changed the discourse. But again, also, what I recognize is it's also a lot about money. And it was very clear the damages, the cost of damages, 4.8 billion. It was very interesting how the political and media coverage all of a sudden changed. Interesting also is the discussion, the media discussion has shifted towards CITES. There's a public office that is in charge of security that is mainly dealing with system and machine hacking, and the question whether this office is going to publicize exploits and vulnerabilities, or if they're going to make them publicly available. And that's going to be interesting to see in the upcoming month how this is going to be discussed. I think this is the discussion that we're going to have in Germany and want to see now. And I think that's the next subject for us, which is the security of devices with regards to botnets on IoT devices and routers. And all of this has been a big subject for all of us. The collateral damage that happens between people, what was it? It was microservers? I don't really remember, really. Anyways, the point here being that devices that are outside are being unsecure. We have old software on these devices. Producers of the devices don't really care. It's not really clear who's responsible. Ultimately, it's the producer of the device. If WannaCry kind of sparked this discussion of whose responsibility is it to maintain security. The telecom router had political reprimandation because it caused for the politicians to really start talking about lengthy hearings from the Ministry of the Inner as well as the Economic Ministry, and the result of this hearing is a working group is called Router TR, and they are supposed to release a technical rule for plaster routers, and it's usually happening in Bonn in the rooms of the Inner Ministry. Linus went there once. He regularly goes there, actually. The goal of this is to create some sort of official stamp and validation that this router is in compliance with technical up-to-date standards that at the moment is completely senseless. But interestingly enough, how strong how reluctant people are to write down security standards that are actually, and like it's really interesting how like it's really hard for people themselves to create routers that are in compliance with security measurements. And I mean, like, it's like normal people are not allowed to put firmware on their own routers, and there's really like there's a lot of lobbyism that happens and that sabotage, and it goes to the point that officials are being sabotaged and we just kind of I'm sorry, well, you can't deal with it like that.
Also was dann so zu solchen Aussagen
and what then leads to things like our network is safe and the whole room is laughing, and then statements such as, is that kind of like our retirement funds are safe? Yeah, kind of like that. And I mean, like they think that there should be like a end of life date, and there should be a sticker on there up to which point is there going to be security updates. There's a round of applause for the demands of that.
Und so, das ist halt so eine Position, die haben wir schon vor mehreren Jahren.
And this kind of position is something that we had a couple of years ago, and I'm like, we wanted to narrow it down to something that everybody understands, like IT security, so that that can be explainable to grandma. I mean, like every Apple has a date of best before, so why not technical hardware? And like if we put that on the routers, they're obviously not safe anymore. And I mean, like, that's obviously not just a problem concerning routers. I mean, like, this is something that we're demanding for every technical hardware, especially when we look at IoT, where there's no best before dates, and like a lot of stuff is being done with like a quick thread and like under Hot Wheels, and there's no concern of that electronic garbage that's being created, all the bugs that are in these products. And I think it's really important that we have regulatory measurements that secure that this is not being put out in the world, and then that this really weird, strange IP camera that then kills the whole internet because it uses a standard password. And I mean, we've seen this. We've crossed this border. We seriously have infrastructure problems because some garbage product is out there and nobody takes care of it. Interestingly enough, there was this hearing that I went to in the Committee of Traffic, and I mean, like, our infrastructure is really in danger because we have so much garbage in there. If you look at the media reports on this and what comes back from journalists when something's broken, when something exploded or some sort of infrastructure broke down, it's interesting, like how suppliers have that attitude that they just expect somebody who finds a gap that they are bringing notice, and then they'll resolve that issue. And I think that's something that we really need to work on. Like, you can't rely on problems being reported once it's already ruled out. And like, there's no take on responsibility. You go out in the world, and when I buy a car and there's an accident that happens because the car doesn't work, obviously the producer of the car is responsible. And like, when it comes to software, we don't have this. A round of applause. I mean, like, this is an old known truth. There's two ways of selling something without having any responsibility for it. One of them is drugs and the other is software. And both of the producers are calling their client base a user. A round of applause for that. Interestingly enough, in this discussion we have, especially when it comes to the routers, we have unexpected comrades and people joining our fight and are supporting us. One of them is people like from the Bundesnetzagentur who are thinking about how can we stabilize the internet if we have 10 million unmaintained products joining that internet? How are we supposed to insure these? So insurances are the other interesting party that is on our side in this case. And the subject IPv6 is coming up, and the official for information and security were like, their response to that was, oh, we're not going to think about that for now. So just to quickly show that we are also like to travel, there were statements that were given in the EU Parliament on the democratic discourse. So how are we going to, as a society, interact with how the discourse is slipping, and what are ways to bring it back and react? And of course, the subject that we just we're talking about, WannaCry, what are our lessons learned of Internet of Things, and who's responsible, and who's going to take legal responsibility with these kind of things? And especially after the German Parliament and government, with the democratic principles, is breaking with these democratic principles. It was very interesting to be sitting in a parliament that really takes its time, that has a lot of professionals, and is interested in making some sort of change. And that was really nice for a change to experience that. I mean, it's always a bit difficult for us. We sometimes go to commissions and committees, but of course this is hard because we obviously know the parliament and the municipal parliaments better than the European scale. But to be honest, when I was there, and I think Linus agrees with me, when I go there, it's not as ritualized. It's my impression was that there was more interest and more honest interest and more dialogue. But, I mean, you can say all in all Europe is positive with certain regards, especially when it comes to regulations of net politics and digital aspects. I mean, some of it is still changing. Some of you might have listened to the e-privacy lecture on the first day that was dealing with official release of data security. And I mean, every once in a while, we really should look to Brussels. There's a few regulations that are coming from the EU base that we really need to look at, and that are going to change stuff for the better. And we should really look at the fact that these changes from Brussels are in our sense and our idea. And there's obviously also the EDRI, the European Digital Rights Institution, and they obviously they try to do that on the EU level, and they're a great partner and a great NGO that we want to support, and that's why I think we should mention them here. There's a round of applause from the audience from this. I think that it really fits the European kind of context. So one of the things where we kind of are very thankful that Europe exists, and that's net neutrality. This year round, we were dealing with that a lot. I mean, in the beginning, there was the stream on deal that the telecom ruled made available, and I mean, especially when it comes to net neutrality, we dealt with stuff like that. And in Europe, we have a special case, and we have a beautiful case where net neutrality is part of EU regulation. And if I understand this correctly, it's supposed to be executed directly. So where something like the USA, where all of a sudden you have somebody that puts a new person in the FCC, and you've got a council of 5 people that are overthrowing fundamental rules. In the EU, we are actually quite lucky, and the dismantlement of net neutrality we're far away from. And I mean, it's obviously giving us headaches here as well, even if only European companies are having to take a back seat in the US, for example. I mean, like, what a lot of people don't realize is that the disadvantage of some is always the disadvantagement of many, and like it's of course also if you block a VoIP supplier, and that's a bittersweet present that the telecom has given us with Stream On. And I mean, you're standing there. So if they are capable to give them unlimited streaming with the prices that they pay, and if only the offerings for big bandwidth or big streaming companies, then I don't understand why this inclusive volume can't be made available for all data. Okay, so basically Telecom Stream One offers unlimited data streaming for certain suppliers. We're going to take more action in this field of work and this subject because obviously there's another one like Vodafone Pars where it's also 0 rating, and we're going to issue a statement that we're going to make publicly available, probably sometimes around end of January. We want to position ourselves in this kind of discussion. And the FCC discussion and decision in the US is going to start an interesting debate in the EU. I do think that we can position ourselves in a very different light, and I do think that in Europe it seems to be possible. And the Bundesnetzagentur definitely is looking at the streaming made available by Vodafone and Telecom as being against our version of net neutrality. Another subject that we should be looking at Brussels for, and where some good stuff happens from Brussels, is data retention, to be honest. Because in Germany we have a law that actually deals with data retention, and this law is not being executed, thankfully, due to a ruling of a court in Nordrhein-Westfalen that, again, made that ruling based on the European Court of Law, and that data retention without reason is not allowed and should not be made possible, and this obviously is in compliance with our idea about this. So, and this also is in line with what other courts have decided within Germany. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that we really have to look at the timeline. In 2015, our legislation, our parliament wanted to do a new attempt at data retention and introduce data retention. And there was a law that was signed and that was supposed to go into action, and actually did went into action in June this year, in July. And then last year, about a year after, we got the ruling from the European High Court that unlimited data retention without any suspicion is not lawful. And then it was very clear that Germany is the only state in Europe, the only country in Europe that at the moment is being in compliance with European legislation and European laws, because our parliament said that's not possible. We can't let this be happening, and we need to be compliant with European law. And then they said, oh no, we'll do it anyways. So they really tried on the 1st of July to introduce data retention, and which obviously caused a lot of complaints, and there was so one of the complaints filed on the lawful measurements was frozen, but at the moment the state that it's in is that the law is signed, but it's not being executed. So this law is there, but I think we need to really work on this, because this law is a law that is violating the European Constitution, and that's really not a joke. way that we live within this European Union, like it's based on ethical morale and fundamental rights and of what it means to be human. And I think we need to really work on really dismantling this law. I mean, I think for now it's kind of this attitude of, well, we're not executing it thanks to the EU. Data retention is not happening in Germany, but at the same time, the law itself is still in place. It's there. There's a round of applause from the audience. I think we covered quite a bit about hearings and judiciary practices and statements, and of course we're the Case Computer Club, so it's also about the fun on the machines. So now it's the fun part. So there's a few stuff, and we want to just show you some examples. How can you deal with security gaps? And we just want to do it iterate through this on the basis of 2 to 3 examples. And we didn't include everything that we did. We just want to kind of show how different producers react towards gaps that are being uncovered. I mean, a lot of times what happens that some of us addresses us. A lot of times I took on this responsibility, and what happens then is I just go into call them up and I'm like, hey, hi, my name is Linus Neumann from the Chaos Computer Club, and the responses I get they vary. One of my most joyful ones was literally, shit, I never thought I'd get a call like this. There was big laughter and a big round of applause for that. But I mean, admittedly, it's the most fun when you when you add the sentence, you probably know why I'm calling. What happened for me once time is the response was like, how do I know this is true? I mean, like anybody could give me like a call. I mean, like, look at the attached exploit on the telephone. I mean, like, a lot of times you have that situation where you're like, I think that you have a problem and we'd like to help you out and solve this problem. I think one of the Elasticsearch clusters were all car sharing, bike sharing. Vehicles were being tracked and capable to be tracked, and I mean, that was closed, and we gave them like a really short time to fix this, and they kept to what we asked for. And look at this, like one of this system. This is in a system where officials, where you register and you go for your passports and stuff like that. In Germany, where you could file for appointments. I mean, we blacked that out, but you could basically access all the database behind this. You could look at all the appointments made, what the appointments were made for. And I mean, obviously, this was one of the things that we were really shocked by, because that was obviously a vulnerability that was there for a long time. On the other hand, the producer of this literally fixed it within 2 minutes. It was an SQL injection, and I told them, please go into that PHP file, please take that parameter, and you're obviously handing that to the database, and that's what it's called. And the guy who's running it is like, oh, I looked at that shit. We usually do prepared statements. How the fuck did that happen? Thank you so much for the call. It is fixed in this second. So while we were on the phone with him, like, that is something where you're like, props where props is due. That was, I mean, like, seeing in that situation, you also, like, it's one of those moments where you prevent, like, don't file a big press release when people fix it that quickly. I mean, like, there's other situations where you have to take different attitudes toward this. I mean, I think the thing that we forget here is what the name of the database means.
Leider ein bisschen anders.
I mean, there's other scenarios where obviously the attitude towards what we find out is different. I mean, this is from last year. The German train company has done Wi-Fi on the trains, and I mean, like, they do digitalization, and they want to digitize everything. So that means that you can also go onto the internet while you're on the train, just like in any other state of on the world. And in order to do that, the train company just bought something, and they were like, "Oh, we got to do Wi-Fi. It's got to go quick." So I found out that that went to one of the people on the high boards, and he let it slip that it was kind of one of a hot fix thing. So there's a company called Icomera, and that's up there in Scandinavia, and it's like the world leader. Oh, that's what they thought. Oh, let's just shop there because there's like 3 people who do it. Wi-Fi on a scale like that, and then when you go onto the landing page, you can very easily by manipulating the JavaScript, understand who's getting on the Wi-Fi, where that person is, where they're logged in, like all sorts of information that you could just kind of scrape from that. They did get rid of that by including JSONP endpoints, and that was then kind of good, but up until this year happened, and then this year we realized they just opened it up again. Like, it's very simple. It was just opened back up. So we then took the same JavaScript, and this time around did publish a press report, press release, and which they then responded to. Yeah, we closed it. 2 days later, we issued the next press release. No, you did not. You actually opened up a new vulnerability. So it's basically like you're picking up pieces from a project that's more than 110 million euros that they bought from a world-leading company that is not capable to solve these security issues properly, and the producer of
Der fand das eigentlich ganz okay, dass das so ist, weil
and the producer was actually like, oh, but like it's actually quite good that it's like this because everything else just makes it really complicated. So they basically just wanted to leave that solution because it's a lot more simple to keep it open. But I mean, like, who cares about the clients who are on the users on the train? What's important and what matters is that the Wi-Fi works. So we obviously took a different attitude, and we didn't notify the German train company before, because companies are more and more relying on the fact that a month before something like that is being publicized, they are being notified and they get time to actually close these kind of gaps. And I mean, there's this story with the banking apps, and we had this, like, we then have to listen to them accusing us of not notifying them about these gaps. And I mean, like, it's stupid to have the app that we generate the tons for then doing banking. And I mean, like, there was a guy from a bank that then were like, oh, I mean, like, you should have just notified us. And I mean, like, we actually did. We notified you 2 years beforehand. And I mean, like, factually speaking, the train knew, like, the German train company knew for 110 million euros they buy Wi-Fi, and then if they don't do it right, how about you don't turn it on the day one, and you just push it back for another month, and you explain to the board why you have to do that? Like, how the heck do you rule out something that is so full of flaws? There's a big round of applause for that.
And the first example of this portal, if you do this for the first time, then it makes sense to responsibly disclose. But in this case, there's not a massive risk of data getting lost at scale, of users being exposed immediately and being in grave danger. And this is where companies' interests have to take a step back from users' interest.
Teilweise diese
And
Kommunikation
as I said earlier,
Leute machen, die sich an uns wenden, die sagen,
we're doing part of the communication for people who come up to us and say, can you help us? Some say, yeah, it might be that, and could you, and would you, and could you help me when I talk to the manufacturer who knows how they're going to react, and ask us to help in communication, especially with the examples I just showed you. Those were generated from the club, from without the club, and we supported them. We'd like to do so.
Begab sich dann, dass auch aus dem Bereich von Jugend die Bitte an mich herankam.
A similar plea came from Jugendhackt, where some teenagers participating in Jugendhackt did what they do. They hacked, and they might need my advice. And we know that this kind of situation doesn't always end very well. If we look back at the hack of StudiVZ, the German Facebook clone from a few years back, and so I wrote a guest post on the Jugendhackt blog about our recommendations in dealing with manufacturers, where I offered my support, and I've traveled across Germany and extinguished some fires where very young people found some very big flaws, and we ensured that those got fixed. And this is a lot of fun.
Das macht allen Beteiligten immer Spaß.
It's a lot of fun for everyone involved.
Können das halt nicht so gut zeigen.
The manufacturers just don't know how to show it. It's more of an inward joy.
Ich muss da ganz ehrlich sagen, die Hersteller, klar,
No, but honestly, the manufacturers, of course, nobody likes to have people stepping on their toes, but for these young people, after you've sat down to table and after I've told them, you're not going to, I cannot imagine that you want to threaten a child. I cannot imagine you mean what you just said. And then you're usually able to reinterpret the situation into an internship or into an apprenticeship.
Ja, also
but there are different examples of how manufacturers deal with these problems. There's a lot of variation.
Hervorhebenswerte Beispiele herausstellen.
And we want to show you some of the most remarkable examples, one of them from this year, but maybe last year we told you things about one messenger that offered secure communication that didn't really understand what secure communication means. So they promised end-to-end encryption and had none at all.
Es ging jetzt über das Jahr noch ein bisschen hin. Also ich habe von denen nichts mehr gehört.
I didn't hear back from them, but a few months ago they came up to me and said, no, this is true, and they had rewritten all their software and asked us to update our communications. So we did, and the manufacturer said that it had been fixed. We were unable to test it. And there was some back and forth, and they considered our blog post hate speech and thought they might need to sue us. I haven't heard back from them yet.
Wie sich das weiterentwickelt. In dem Zuge haben sie sich aber Hilfe geholt.
I'm eager to see how this develops, but they are now certified secure.
Und sie haben tatsächlich ein Unternehmen
they found a company that certifies that the software now is secure until August 2018.
Lacht nicht, das ist nicht komisch.
No, don't laugh, it's not funny. It's actually
wir haben halt den Namen des
fairly awful.
Unternehmens mal geschwärzt.
We redacted the name of the issuing company, but anyone want to guess?
Ja, vielleicht kann man es raten, aber wir haben es mal geschwärzt.
You may be able to guess it, but we redacted it.
Vortragen, weil man das nicht richtig lesen kann. Oder könnt ihr das lesen?
Also was Sie
kann man sich ja googeln, die bewerben ja dieses Zertifikat.
I mean, you can Google it. They're very proud of this certificate, and they don't seem to have
Also wenn am Ende ein Zertifikat
reproach anything to themselves. I mean, if there is this certificate, then it's usually quite obvious who bought it.
Also es gab dieses Geschäftsmodell früher schon mal, das hieß Ablasshandel.
And this business model is not new. It used to be called
im Mittelalter hat man dafür aber wenigstens noch so eine schöne handgemalte Urkunde
discharge.
bekommen. Heutzutage
But in the
sich irgendwie um die Details seines Word-Processings zu kümmern.
The church used to do this, but
ein schönes illustratives Beispiel.
we try to find a nice illustrative example.
Die zuständigen Leute sind.
And it feels like the people in charge went to Congress and just didn't understand our stickers.
Man muss sagen, vielleicht hätte der Hersteller das günstiger haben können.
But maybe the manufacturer could have done this cheaper. I mean, we give away these stickers. They could have just taken one and stuck it on their product.
Ja, kommen wir noch mal darauf zurück, weil ich vorhin schon einwarf, weil mir nicht mehr bewusst war, dass wir da eine extra Folie hatten. Wir haben auch eine Stellungnahme abgegeben zum EID-Gesetz.
We also sent out a statement on the EID Act, the
in der Ausweiskarte enthalten ist.
Electronic Identification Act, and there is a chip embedded into German ID cards. Most Germans don't actually have it enabled, and fewer yet use it, and there are very few places where you even can use it. So the Grand Coalition had the great idea of that they had to push this, and
das tote Pferd nicht reiten, aber vielleicht können wir es verpflichten.
we can't ride a dead horse, but maybe we can force people to ride it.
Der Beschluss war, der ist jetzt auch in Gesetz geworden, dass man
And this has become law.
selber entscheiden kann, ob diese
So you're no longer
aktiviert. Man kann auch
asked if you want to enable EID when you get a new ID card.
jemand voraus, und da brauche ich nicht mal eine Kristallkugel für. Es wird trotzdem
Of course, I don't need a crystal ball to tell you that nobody's going to use this,
So ist das.
because there are no applications for it.
Im Gesetz auch versucht, die Anwenderseite ein bisschen zu incentivieren.
Of course, they try to incentivize the part of the the applications, but that's not what I meant to talk about.
Überleitung zum nächsten Thema.
Der große Klops in diesem Gesetz war,
So
bei der Einführung der
the biggest part of this law was
wurde uns ja
that
hoch und heilig versprochen,
when
dass diese Daten nicht zentral gesammelt
biometrics were being embedded into passports, we were promised that there would not be a central biometric database. But of course, this turned into a problem, especially if you want to do automatic face recognition at Südkreuz Station in Berlin. And that means that we were quite astonished when we read this, that all federal agencies are now allowed to centrally request all this biometric data.
Nicht mal eine Debatte wert gewesen. Ich fand das sehr
And
interessant.
it didn't even seem to be worthy of debate.
In diesem Gesetz
There was some delay in this
was dann rauskam und letztlich auch vom
process of writing this law.
Verschärfung dieser Situation.
Um,
Natürlich gab es
and
von allen, die
in the end, Parliament ended up making the situation worse. And
Biometriedaten gewidmet haben, auch Kritik.
of course, there was criticism,
Keine Form
but
von Reaktion.
no reaction in any shape or form.
Und damit war das klar. Wir haben also jetzt quasi
So
diesen automatisierten Zugriff.
now we have this automated access, and the protocolling is happening on the side of those requesting access. So it's impossible to know who's accessing data. There could be a shadow database where there would not even be any
greifbar machen schon,
protocolling.
aber jetzt noch zentral loggen, wer da alles reinkommt, das wäre echt ein bisschen.
So it's apparently possible to make it centrally accessible, but we can't have any central logging because that would be too much effort.
Wer sich an diesen Bahnhof stellt und sagt, ja, wir wollen hier diese Biometrie, er sagt nicht Biometrie, er sagt immer Videoüberwachung. Wir wollen die flächendeckend, dann kriegt man natürlich irgendwie schon
When you it's really terrifying to think about what this is going to enable.
Wir möchten, dass diese EID möglichst weitgehend benutzbar wird und benutzt wird.
And the law aims to make EID as accessible as possible to people, or as usable as possible to people. This chip is embedded into all passports and ID cards. And
wie kriegt man diesen Chip da eigentlich tot?
For years, there's been people have wondered how to kill this chip.
Es gibt noch eine andere Geschichte, wo es plötzlich um zentrale Datenbanken geht.
And central databases are part of another debate as well. I mean, not everybody needs a new ID card all the time, but passports are a thing. And one thing changed significantly last year that's in contravention of the law, and that's the passport.
Anfang April, das war so
And
April,
on the 7th of April,
spontan mal der EU-Grenzkodex geändert
the European
aufgenommen
Border Codex has been changed, and
grundsätzlich die biometrischen Daten aus den Dokumenten gelesen
now biometric data has to be
und gegen zentrale Datenbanken
read whenever you cross the Schengen border and has to be correlated with law enforcement databases to prevent terrorism.
abgerufen von den
So this data is being read from the documents and being sent somewhere in the respective states.
Das deutsche Gesetz oder das
But the
deutsche
German law
diese Daten ausschließlich zur Überprüfung der Gültigkeit und der
states that this data can only be used
also dass das mein Ausweis ist, also der
to
Persönlichkeit.
verify the identity of the bearer of the document.
Deswegen wir uns eigentlich dann ein bisschen dazu gezwungen gesehen haben, auch
So we felt forced
nochmal zu erklären,
on that very day to explain that
deaktivieren.
there are ways of disabling that chip. It's not recommended by the manufacturer,
Es gibt
but
Geräte zu kaufen.
there are some very handy devices. I brought something along. There are manufacturers on the market that produce this kind of thing. It's a
Also wirklich
very useful device for
deaktivieren. Das gibt es auch in
disabling identity documents. You can actually use. I've seen it in hackerspaces as well. It's the mobile version of an inductive stove.
Aber ich muss das erstmal anschließen.
Let me just get it wired up.
Wir können damit nämlich auch mit Sicherheit zeigen, dass im Gegensatz zu dem
we'll be able to
in die Mikrowelle zu legen, hier keine Brandlöcher.
unlike putting this in the microwave, we're going to be able to prove to you that this is not going to cause
Warte mal.
any burns.
Also es ist diese Induktionskochfelder senden so kleine Impulse.
So these induction stoves send impulses to.
Das ist sehr experimentell.
I mean, this said something about 2,000 watts. It's very experimental.
Und ich stelle das mal auf Maximum, das sollte reichen.
I'm going to set it to maximum. That should be enough.
Der Krach ist normal.
The noise is normal.
Und alles, was man eigentlich machen muss,
And
also das geht auch relativ
all you need to do, it happens quite quickly.
Magisch.
Just
Und dann ist der eigentlich
stir,
durch.
and it should be well done.
Als Ausweisdokument auch noch, nur nicht
It looks the same as earlier. It still works as an identity document, just no longer electronically.
Das gehörte eigentlich zu der Reihe digitale Mündigkeit.
This should be part of the digital literacy, digital emancipation series.
Abgerufen, aber möglicherweise, da wir ja vielleicht in Zukunft noch andere Maßnahmen von Thomas.
And because we have to expect other ideas from our Minister of the Interior in future, this is maybe something you want to consider.
Dann gab es noch ein Thema.
All right. Then there was another topic this year in Germany, the G20 Summit.
Gerät dann auch der Chaos Computer Club so an dem Punkt, wo er sagt, okay, es gibt irgendwie.
There we also reach a point as the Chaos Computer Club. We're an association of hackers,
Was wir als Club
but
oder was Leute
where do we reach the point of what can we actually do? What can people associated with this club do? And when we're talking about general political activism, we see that there's different groups within the club that maybe get together and do something that Tuvat. And the Berlin group, yeah, they were, somehow angry about this this meeting in Hamburg, and there wasn't anything done in Berlin. So we had the G23 summit in Berlin, a small little event with lots of nice people that met 1 month before the G20 summit in Hamburg, and just networked for a little bit, exchanged experience, and also at the G20 summit itself, parts of CCC went there and organized a media center, working together with the Freedom Care Media Center, that provided live streams and opportunities for journalists from all over the world to work together. And I really feel that this sort of activism also stands for the CCC. It's really people working so very hard, putting themselves at risk and doing what we do best, building infrastructure. And that's great. And applause for that. So, one example, people from the club worked all throughout the year to support different events, especially the VOC, video group, for all sorts of different political events. And so we as hackers have the opportunity to make a difference, to engage, to bring a connection to places that need it. And that is one aspect where the CCC really is able to make a difference, because other organizations and associations are quite helpless sometimes. So, yeah, helpless organizations. That brings us right to the German federal election 2017. We had to look at a election software, and leading up to that, this project was brought to us by Kai Biermann from the German news site Online. He said, I've got this student here, and he said he sort of hacked the Hesse election. And yeah, we said, all right, let's have a look at this. And working together with Martin Schiersig, the student from Darmstadt, we looked at this and found that, yeah, this is quite nice, but before we, make this public, let's see what else we can find. And then at the end we had a 23-page report where we listed every vulnerability that we found, gave all the details and explained various attack scenarios for attacking this election software. And so this hack that Martin did in which he could have manipulated all of the Hesse election results centrally, we were like, this would be nice if we could do this on the federal level. And so working together with Thorsten Schröder, we dug a little deeper, and I'm gonna, skip a few details here because we had a talk on this yesterday. You can see and listen to that on media.ccc.de. great recording, thanks to the VOC again, Video Operations Center. And we're very proud, you know, to having used the lack of updates and lack of encryption.
In Anlehnung an die
something we call Quellentelekommunikationsmanipulation, so source telecommunications manipulation, play on words about surveillance of telecommunication. So as always, we as the CCC approached the vendor. Kai Biermann was very helpful and facilitated the communication. And it truly was a clay pigeon shooting. So it was quite easy for us to find these vulnerabilities, and we always we showed them what to do and told them about signed updates. But yeah, it all fell over again, and it was just back and forth over multiple releases. And on the 19th of September, we realized that the vendor isn't able to provide an update mechanism, and so we just released our own security fix as open source. Yeah, so I mean, it's about the federal elections. So you know, yesterday we also pointed out that we have some sort of responsibility there. We wanted to vote also. You mean you only wanted to give one vote? Yeah, so it might have gotten through that our cooperation depends on how well we can work together with a vendor, a software vendor, and the developers here didn't just screw up the technical side, because of course our sort of little open source update mechanism gift, it was pretty clear that they wouldn't implement that. Instead they said, well, you know, if the updates are the problem, then there's just not gonna be any updates anymore. And so a few days before the federal election, they just stopped all updates. They publicly stated there won't be any online updates anymore. And said that if you wanted to update the software, you should contact the counselor. So yeah, so this is an update mechanism that is in need of a special counselor, which just isn't acceptable. So a few days before the federal election, all versions of the software still were critically vulnerable. They wouldn't be fixed, we knew that, and so from the various voting stations, we heard that, well, we're using, you know, you've in your report, you've talked about 2017 software being vulnerable. But we still use one from 2015, so is that affected as well? And that really, sent shivers down our spine. So, of course, we also this was a lot of work writing the patches ourselves, and we made some demands as well. So these demands concerning voting software, voting computers, they were not only against voting machines, voting computers, were also about assisting voting machines. So for us, security and dependency are very important with these machines, and we just don't see that in the software. And the software that is used in elections can't be secret. It mustn't be secret. And there's a round of applause for that.
Ja. Und das heißt, wir brauchen also
So
nicht nur Open Source Software.
we need not only open source software,
Ja, Wahlämtern, sondern in
but
halt einfach da durchgehen.
in the election offices all throughout the election process. We need auditing.
Mit dem Quellcode publiziert.
We need access to the software. We need source code being published, and these demands, especially the demand for open source software within this realm, got a great response on an international level, because that really struck a nerve in the US. The same problem exists in the US, but it's a lot more severe. And so the big bad cyber Russian was looming at the door. And due to this international collaboration, we're hopeful that until the next federal election rolls around, we're gonna, have our demands met. Yeah, and a lot of people signed this campaign. And we also want to mention a response by the federal election officer. Just because no one ever looked at a certain software, it doesn't mean that it's better. So the election officer, they said, well, we also use Microsoft Office. So yeah, that's there's still a lot of work to do there. And this is so sad because it really would be possible to count all of Germany's federal election using open source software and having open source software all throughout that process. And then we could just be like, git pull countvotes.py. But all we have today is, a huge waste of resources and money, and that gives us intransparency and vulnerability. And it would be so nice to use these public funds and public software to realize an election. And I really don't understand why that doesn't happen.
In dem Kontext kommt ja tatsächlich dann bei den Ländern die
regarding this,
solche Sachen sowieso nicht offen.
every time you ask on the state level, they always say that we have security by obscurity, as every computer scientist knows. So the FDP, Liberal Party of Germany, had this nice election slogan, which we modified slightly. So think first, digital second. That's what it says.
Ja, wir kommen so langsam zum Schluss. Wie schon mehrfach erwähnt, haben wir...
We're coming to a close, almost. As mentioned before, there's lots of local events within the Chaos Computer Club community. And we have to sort of, that was like scrolling here, trying to give you an overview of everything that happened throughout the year. And we probably missed a few, but on events.ccc.de there's always the whole list. I'm just gonna, run it again. We're so nice.
Die Frage halt, wo ist
and the question, where's the next event? There's the website I just mentioned. There's blog posts, and these events are much smaller than Congress, but they're really, really nice, and they're great opportunities to get in touch with people, get to know people, especially people from the same area as you. And so I really want to encourage you to check out those local events and participate there. And that is it for today. Thanks very much for